and seeing all the stuff that everybody else is doing provides me an awful lot of comfort. So one night after a couple of wines, I decided to start messaging all my favourite famous Instagram adopters who've written books and podcasts and all the rest of it to see if they'd be interested in doing some talks for us. And as it transpires, adopters love talking about adoption. And everyone replied saying, yeah, that'd be amazing. We'd be up for that. So Holly's our first one, which is fabulous. Who's very famous in my little world of my daughter's bookcase with the Deli Duck series. And I always know, poor child who has a social worker for a mother and as an adopter, we've got her sort of storybook case full of lots of children's books and also what I call our adoption stories. And she'll always, there's not an adoption section, I just wanted to add, it's not that bad, the storybooks. But whenever she wants to talk about stuff that's going on or she's got some questions, she'll always pull out one of the what I call the famous adoption stories, like Holly's or someone else's. And I know that that's like she needs to talk about something. So Holly's book and many others have been a great tool for us. So we will keep you all posted about future events as well. Stu is recording this so that we can use Holly's talk for other people that can come along and to help promote things and help other adopters coming through. And Holly's going to do her talk. You can have your cameras off or on, but we will mute. And we'll take questions at the end. But if people want to use the chat function for questions, that's absolutely fine as well. So we'll hand over to Holly, who's going to share her story with us, which is a unique story, as every adopter's is, because it's Holly obviously had a birth child before adopting her gorgeous little one. So over to you, Holly. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about myself, and as Karen said, feel free to shove questions in the chat. I'm not especially smooth, despite the fact that I've done this quite a lot of times, so I do apologise if I jump around a bit. So just to give you a bit of context about who I am and why I ended up adopting, I did have my daughter biologically, so I can get pregnant, but during pregnancy we at the 12 weeks point we had some blood tests and I found that I have rhesus negative blood type, and my husband has rhesus positive blood type, so that meant which is the dominant type, so that meant that babies we have are most likely going to have the same blood type as him, and my blood basically treats it as a virus. So it was okay with Zoe because our blood didn't mix until right at the end of the pregnancy, but essentially now my body is ready to attack any children I have with my husband. And I really like my husband, so I don't really plan on having children with anyone else. So when we came to thinking about future children, it was there were a few possibilities where we could have used a surrogate who had the same blood type as my husband.
Holly, you just went on mute accidentally, I think, lovely.
Oh yeah, it says somebody muted me.
Okay.
Sorry if that was me.
Okay, no worries. So we had a few options medically where we could have gotten around it if we wanted to have a baby who was biologically mine or biologically my husband's. But we just weren't really interested, and we kind of thought adoption, it was just more exciting. We have friends who've adopted and they are just a wonderful family. And a few people said to me, yeah, but, you know, is it going to be the same? But I looked after a friend's son quite frequently. She has some health problems, so every now and then I'd look after him, and he's just amazing. And I was falling in love with him, and I thought the more I look after a child, the more I'm going to feel a bond with them. I'm sure lots of you have had the same thought process, that it's not hard to love a child. I think children are probably more easy to love than adults a lot of the time. So I wasn't worried about any of that. So we went into adoption quite excited. I'd kind of considered it a long time ago anyway, because I'd done some volunteering in an orphanage in Africa, but that was a very different kind of adoption that went on there. So we went to find out about adoption and go through the process. And the first time that we actually went, we got turned away because our birth daughter was still really young, only 1, and we were told we needed a bigger gap. So that was the first time that having a birth child affected our adoption process. But we keenly went back a couple of years later, when she was 3, and thankfully over most of the terrible twos. So we knew that she was in a good place to cope with having a younger sibling. My screen's just changed and it's just got one person's face. Can you all still see me? Someone shout if you can't. I don't really know how to change that.
Yeah,
no?
I
Okay.
can see you, Holly.
Okay, good. So we had our training. I'm not sure if you guys are all, if you've had your training or if there's a mixture of you who have adopted and are prospective adopters, but I'll talk you through my process quickly anyway. So during our training, we met lots of people, and quite a few of them at the time also had a birth child of a similar age, which meant that they were restricted to adopting children of a similar age, because we have to have that gap between any children already in the family and any new children coming in. So because of that, we felt like it could end up in us being shown the same profiles, and that could be a bit awkward. So we made what I think was a terrible mistake of not exchanging phone numbers with them. So if any of you are still in the intro stage, please don't do that. Just make the friends, because all the people I've met who are adopters are amazing, and I'm really glad they're in my life, and I'm sure we would have found ways to deal with any awkwardness had it arisen. Unfortunately, I've built an adoption network now, so it's fine. I've got my little support group locally and online, which is how I met Karen. So we had our training. Then we went on to stage 2, which was all quite intense. My daughter really loved being interviewed. That was a real highlight for her. She'd been very excited about being interviewed. I was a little bit nervous about mentioning adoption to her in case for some reason it didn't actually happen, because there's no guarantees that you're going to have the right match, and that you're going to be the right family for a child. So I sort of mentioned that adoption is a thing that happens, and I talked to her about how it happens and that sort of thing, and she immediately said, well, let's do that. And so then I felt quite a lot of pressure, because she asked me several times a day when we were going to adopt a child. And so I explained that the social workers were coming to do their assessments, and was always very careful to make sure that she knew that it was finding the right match for the child, not finding us a baby, because that's how it is. And I thought it was important that she knows that the right way around. So we went on to, we went through stage 2, all was fine, and then we went to matching. And as any of you who've been through matching will know, time changes. So it was like the minutes became hours and the hours became days, and it was horrendous waiting for the right match. But we actually got shown a profile really early on of a little boy, and the social worker said to us that she thought it was meant to be and that he was exactly the right match for us. So we had the linking meeting, read his profile, thought we could handle all of his health risks and medical risks, and had the linking meeting. At this point, we didn't really feel like a magical connection and think, oh, he's the one. But we didn't expect to. I hadn't when we had my birth daughter. I actually felt a bit crazy for the first week when we had my birth daughter. I had hallucinations the morning after she was born, because I'd had so many hormones put into my body and chemicals and things. So I didn't have that kind of instant bond. I didn't have full-on postnatal depression, but I just felt a bit like I was in a fog for a few days. So I didn't expect to have those feelings for a child who I had never met, and who was a bit older, so he would already have a personality and I'd have to really get to know him. I thought, that's fine, it will grow. And my husband was of a similar mindset, really. So we weren't worried about that, but we were asked in the meeting how we felt about him and that sort of thing, and had to explain that we were viewing this, as we feel we can provide a good family for this child, that sort of thing. So they were happy with our answers. We didn't think there was any reason why we couldn't be his parents, so we proceeded on. We just had a few outstanding questions about his medical conditions, and those got answered by email over the next few weeks. And unfortunately, some more and more information arose. It transpired that he actually had a really severe health condition, which when the social workers were kind of saying, we think you can still handle this, but we looked into it a bit more, and then we asked for a meeting with his medical advisor, and eventually we all kind of came to the conclusion that actually he should be adopted by a family who didn't have any children. He was going to need more attention. So despite the fact that we hadn't felt a kind of really strong bond or anything, it was still quite heartbreaking when that fell apart, because we'd been really excited, and we started buying things and planning, and not fully organising the room, but we got a few things for his room, and we thought perhaps we would be put to the back of the queue because we'd said no, effectively. But our social worker was really understanding, and so was the family finder, and they reassured us that they know that the right family will be there for him somewhere. So we weren't put to the back of the queue. So if you're ever in that position, please don't think that you will be. That doesn't really happen. We got sent another profile a few weeks later, which we were interested in. We were interested in learning more. But that little boy was matched with someone else before we even got more information. It seemed like there was a really ideal match for him somewhere. So we didn't really proceed very far down that route. And that was quite disappointing as well. But quite soon after that, we got another profile through who, again, had too many difficult medical conditions. He was going to be in hospital for probably a week, a month, which was just something that when you already have a birth child, you have to think about the impact that it's going to have on your child or another adopted child. You have to think about these things, don't you? So we felt that would be too much, and with heavy consciences, we said we couldn't handle that. But then the fourth profile came through, and I was completely shocked because I hadn't expected to feel anything. But after reading 2 paragraphs about my son, spoiler alert, he's my son. After reading 2 paragraphs about this boy, I felt that he was my son. And I felt this really, like almost an overwhelming anxiety, because he was with someone else and I didn't know this foster carer, and I felt like he should be with me because then I'll know that he's okay and I can look after him the way he needs to be looked after. And it was completely irrational, because obviously his foster carer had him for many months and she knew his routine much better than I did. But make of that what you will. It was some sort of instinctive thing. I really felt that he was supposed to be my child. So we shared those feelings with the social worker, although I did turn it down a little bit so I didn't sound completely off my rocker. And then spent the next few weeks drafting slightly obsessive emails explaining why I would be the best family for him, and then deleting them because we'd already explained it once and I needed to calm down. So it stirred something up in me that I didn't expect. And I really felt that he was supposed to be my son. This was all during lockdown, so we were doing all of this remotely. We had our calls with the social worker remotely at this point, which is quite normal now, I think, but at the time it was all very novel. And so they weren't really sure how things were going to proceed. So we had quite a few delays with the panel and then finally with the intros because of COVID. So Our whole intros process got delayed by a couple of months because my husband has asthma and the foster family had somebody in there who also had a similar condition that at the time was on the COVID risk list. So we then had to navigate intros remotely, which were quite emotional, really. And I think it actually set us back in a way because my son was learning that we were nice people to talk to, but we had to stay 2 meters away from each other. And every time he tried to crawl towards us, his foster carer was having to pull him back away from us. So I think that was a bit harmful, although it wasn't the intent, obviously. But it was wonderful to see him, and we were really fortunate that we were able to do a socially distanced picnic on his birthday. So we got to see him on his first birthday, and we dropped off a birthday present a few days before to be quarantined, and so that was he opened that with his foster carer's help in front of us, and it was a toy phone. So I got my daughter a similar one, and they were pretending to talk to each other on the phone, which was adorable. And it was really strange trying to be fun from a distance. My husband's amazing at that. He can juggle and do all sorts of tricks. So he was just being hugely entertaining, and my son just wanted to be with him. So that was great. So yeah, that was really, really special that we got to meet him despite all the COVID restrictions. And then finally, when we did have our intros, that was very, very emotional. He hadn't touched anybody outside of the foster family for probably about 3 months at this point. So the first time each of us made any kind of physical contact with him, whether it was to put an arm, my daughter put an arm around him the first time I picked him up, he just sobbed. He was absolutely devastated. But we managed to tickle him. Luckily, he was really, really ticklish. So we managed to kind of tickle him and jiggle him back to happiness, and it was all okay. But that definitely complicated things. We also had another complication in that none of the children could go to school during lockdown. So we had, there were 2 other foster children in the placement and a birth child in the foster family. So we had those 3, and then the 2 children who are now my children. So it was really quite busy at times. And the foster family do have quite a big house to be able to have all those children, but still it was quite intense having the 2 families together for the best part of a week. During intros, we spent more time with him each day, as is typical, and had a review partway through to check it was all going okay, and we all expressed that it was fine, but intense. But the part that my daughter found the most exciting was when my son came to our house for the first time. And I had requested that the other foster children also come, and we got that written into the plan because I wanted them to know that he was going to be safe. So I wanted them to see that this is a safe house and that we have loads of toys and that he had a nice bedroom and that kind of thing, so that they could imagine him and know that he'd be all right. So they all came along. The morning before, in fact, the afternoon before the day that they came, my daughter spent that time just cleaning in the sort of cleaning frenzy that I actually naturally go into. And I'd already cleaned the house, I'd blitzed it out of excitement. But she was going around asking me what she could clean. So that was really amazing, just to see her so excited. And then she put on her best dress, which was a floor-length red shiny dress with sparkles on. She stood at the front in the hallway, just by the front door, holding a toy so that he'd know that she's fun. And she waited, and she just stood there for about 10 minutes because they were running a bit late. And she was just so excited, and she wanted that to be his first impression of her in our house. So that was very, very sweet. And we enjoyed showing him around and that sort of thing. And we also made sure that we had done the very typical thing where you wash some of your clothes in the washing powder that the foster family use. And this is something that I'm sure you'll all have heard of or will hear of. Lots of social workers recommend it because obviously the sense of smell is really powerful. So I thought we may as well do that. There's no harm in it. So we washed lots of blankets, and we had like one big thing in each room, usually a blanket, but I made sure that there was at least one big thing so that it was kind of a scent of his a familiarity wherever he went in our home. And I was absolutely shocked because when he came in, he could crawl at this point, and he would crawl in. We kind of let him crawl around and explore. And every room that he went into, he'd stop and sniff the air, and then he went over to the item that was washed in that washing powder, and he'd sniff it and bury his face in it and make a kind of contented little noise, like, So it works. It absolutely works. It was amazing. And we put my daughter's dressing gown in that washing powder as well. So she loved that. She was getting a lot of hugs from him, which was adorable. So that's absolutely worth doing during intros. I strongly recommend it. So then we got settled in, and he was dropped off and by the foster family a couple of days later for good. We do stay in contact with the foster family. That's been really important to us because they're a really big part of his life, obviously, and he loves them. And he sees the boys who he lived, the children as a daughter as well. He sees those children as his brothers and sister, or at least cousins, maybe somewhere in between. But it's a very strong bond, and they really all love each other. So it's very important that we keep that going. And I find that if he ever goes through any phases where he's just kind of frustrated with life, I mean, he's 3 now, so that does happen anyway. But whenever he's going through a tough patch where things are irritating him a lot, if we go through the photo albums that we got from the foster family and show him the photos of the foster family, or even better, if we can meet them, it's like it just diffuses all the rage in his body and it totally calms him down. So I'm a huge advocate for contact. It's really worked for us, staying in contact with them. And that brings me on to contact with birth family. So we, after Jake moved into our family, we had a bit of an unusual situation. Because of COVID, the foster family hadn't done the last meeting with the birth family, which our agency called the Wish You Well meeting. I know there's a few different names for it, so you may not use the same terminology, but it's the last one where they say goodbye to him, which is very sad. And so I'd said that I would take him to that, but they obviously didn't want me to meet his birth family at the same time. We do hope to meet them, but social workers felt that it was a bit unfair for them to meet me at the same time as saying goodbye to their son. So I had to take him there, and then he got passed over to his social worker, who sadly he didn't really remember because he hadn't seen her very much in lockdown. But I passed him over in his car seat as my heart broke. And then got him back an hour later, and for days and days, he would not go in the car seat. He just wouldn't even entertain the idea. And for weeks afterwards, he was very emotional if anybody else went near the car seat. So my mum once handed me the car seat, and he just fell apart. He was horrified. He just kept shaking his head. I couldn't really say much at that point, but it was a clear no. So we had a few similar incidents that were kind of attachment related in the early days, where he was worried. He was clearly worried that he was going to get moved on somewhere else. So whenever the doorbell rang, he was very stressed, and he did not like seeing any delivery people. The post officer who comes round, he loves him now. They're great friends, and the Asda delivery people and the bin men, they all know him. He's a very sociable little boy. But in those early weeks, he was absolutely terrified. And so we had to comfort him quite a lot through that, which is all quite normal stuff. But I thought I'd share that because sometimes I think hearing that this is normal from someone who's been through it is helpful if you then go through it yourself. So we had a couple of weeks where he clearly preferred my husband from the start, but he was quite friendly to me. The only problem that we had was he had known the foster parents as mummy and daddy, partly because they had a birth child in the placement. So every time my daughter said mummy, he was absolutely devastated because he really loved that foster carer and he just wanted to be with her. So as she dropped him off at the front door, he kept crawling to the front door and pointing there and crying. So that was quite devastating. But we just kept cuddling him and comforting him through it, and showing him photos so that he'd know that we still will talk about them and they haven't disappeared from his life, trying to reinforce that. And then when we were able to meet up again, that obviously helped to reinforce that too. And I felt a shift then, that he was a bit more comfortable, that he was staying with us, but they still come and see him, and that's okay. And there was an interesting point during that visit where the female foster carer referred to her husband as daddy, talking to a different child, and my son Jake just said no, and zoomed over to my husband and went on his lap. So that was really reassuring, because we felt then that he wants us to be his parents, or at least he wanted my husband to be his daddy. So about we had quite a long time where it did feel like he was rejecting me. Certainly as soon as he saw my husband, he didn't want to know about me. He was fine with me if we were out, then he would cling to me because I was obviously the most familiar person he knew. And I felt like he liked me, but I didn't really feel that he loved me. And my husband thought that was really silly at the time. And he was saying, no, of course he loves you, he plays with you, but you can feel when someone loves you. You just, you know. And I hope that he knew that I loved him. That's what I tell myself. Because I did love him from ridiculously early on, and I'll never understand that. My scientific brain can't make sense of that. But there we go. But about 9.5 months in, one evening I said to my husband, it's been different this week, and I feel like he actually loves me now, and something's changed. And John said, that doesn't make sense. He's loved you for ages, don't be silly. But the next morning, Jake, for the first time ever, said, love you, mummy. And he'd never said love you to anyone else. So that kind of validated my feelings on that. I'm sure that something changed then. He felt that I wasn't going to go away, or he wasn't going to get moved on. Something definitely changed. So I think what else you need to know. So yeah, so he's been with us now for 2.5 years. His bond with my daughter is amazing. She started school a few months after he moved in, and she used to bring him home something that she made every day, and it was just adorable. So she'd draw a teddy, colour it, cut it out, and then give it to him to be his toy and that sort of thing. And he got used to it. So every day she'd come home and she'd get her book bag out and she'd say, what's in my book bag today? And rustle it dramatically, and he'd be jumping up and down all excited. So that was just wonderful. Absolutely loved it. And it felt like they bonded a bit extra as well, like their bond deepened when his surname changed. And I told my daughter that the social workers had finished their paperwork and the judge had done their bit of paperwork, and he's officially a Marlow now, just like us. And I just kind of expected her to be like, okay, fine. But she was so excited. She grabbed both my hands and she spun me round like we were doing Ring a Ring Roses, sort of giggling and shrieking and cheering. And he was having a nap at the time, but he woke up quite soon after, probably because of the cheering. And she raced upstairs and flung his door open and said, Jake, you're a Marlow, like I'm Zoe Marlow, you're Jake Marlow. And he was so excited. I got him out of the cot and he started running around with his arms in the air saying, I'm Marlow. And it was just one of the best memories. I'll never forget that moment because it was so wonderful. So that has been really special, seeing their bond grow. And I must admit, during the tough times when we had some attachment struggles, seeing that bond grow helped me, because I thought quite a few times, even if he never loves me, it'll be enough for me if I just get to see this wonderful bond for the rest of my life. But thankfully it didn't come to that. So I feel like I've been talking for quite a long time. I can keep going endlessly, but has anyone got any questions? If not, I'll talk to you about how I do life story work. Can't see any questions popping in. So, okay, so I'm really, really passionate about life story work, as cheesy as that sounds, because as I alluded to earlier, it really helps my son with his emotions when we talk about his foster family. He doesn't remember the birth family, but just having seen, or at least he doesn't think he remembers them, he may on some level, but at least having seen how he responds to the photos of the foster family, I can see that knowing about his birth family from an early age is going to really benefit him. And I've got adopted friends who've known their life story from a very young age, and they're really emotionally well-balanced, wonderful people, two of the kindest men I've ever met. So I hope that my son will grow up to be as happy as they are in life. So I started doing life story work with Jake basically as soon as he came to live with us. And I would talk about how he used to live with the foster family, and he lived with them because he couldn't live with his birth family. So he went to stay with them while the social workers found him us the right family for him to live with. And I started that when he was 13 months old. And I remember a few people saying to me that, you know, he's not going to remember this. But it was really important for me because I wanted to have lots of time to kind of rehearse my script. And I ended up with quite a quite a set script that I would go through, not every day, but probably once a week, more if he was struggling with his feelings and needed to be reminded that the foster carers still care about him. And so I did that probably for about a year, and then he got to the point where his speech was good enough that we can just have normal conversations about it now. His memory is also phenomenal, which I think probably has something to do with his trauma, because he was 13 months when he moved to us, but he can still tell me things that happened while he was in foster care. And if I check with the foster family, he's right. And they're not things that they've told me, well, he's in earshot or that we've seen photographs of. It's really random things like the flavour of Pringles that one of the boys eats, and that one of them's lactose intolerant and things like that. One of them can't eat cheese, very seriously. So he's got a really incredible memory. So now we don't need to keep going through it all, but it was really beneficial to me to do that even from a young age, so that I could rehearse it and kind of get the wording right and make sure I was saying the things I wanted him to understand. Another thing that I've done, as you all know, is I've written a book. And the reason I did that was initially to help explain to, well, I've written lots of books, but initially I wanted to explain to my daughter why some children can't live with their birth families, because that was the question that Zoe kept coming up with when we were talking about adoption. And she was really quite sad about it. She was devastated at the thought that some children can't live with their parents, you know, because she was imagining what it'd be like to not live with me and my husband. So I wrote Deli Duck, which many of you will have seen, and I hope you find it useful. I tried to make it, well, as I was creating the story to explain it to her, I thought I will use this for life story work with my future child. So I tried to make it, at the time I didn't know which child I was going to end up being matched with. So I tried to make it full of metaphors that would apply to lots of different situations. So forgive me if you've read the book and this is old news to you, but there's the main character is the birth mother who doesn't consistently look after her egg properly, and a social worker comes along and is worried, so checks on her several times, gives her advice, tries to help her. I wanted to show that social workers do that, because that's a really important thing, that children should understand that you don't just lose your child like that. You know, there's a lot of steps that happen. And so my daughter felt a bit safer then, knowing that, you know, we weren't struggling, and she was confident that I know how to look after a child. I reassured her that I'd seen, you know, I had strong role models from my parents, and I'm really good at remembering things, so I remember what they taught me, and I'm quite good at concentrating, so I never forget to feed her, and lots of different examples of why that wasn't going to happen. But it was really helpful for explaining it to her, and now I use that a lot with my son, and he's very proud to be little Chick in the story. So that's nice that he associates that with himself now. As there's no more questions, I'm going to keep talking about what other books I've written. So I also wrote this one with my daughter, adopting a little brother or sister, because when I was going through this, when we were all going through this process, we kind of needed this book, and it didn't exist. So it just talks about some of the frustrations that a child might have waiting, but it's also kind of an exciting one to get them excited about it. We've also then created So You've Adopted a Sibling, which was the book that we needed after placement, really. And I think in many ways, adopting a child was a lot harder on Zoe than it would have been if we'd had a birth child, because maybe not a lot harder, but it was harder in different ways. And it was hard because he already had a routine, a really, really good routine. It was really strong. The foster care was regimented. She did a brilliant job, and his sleep was incredible. It's gone out the window now, sadly. Although we did try to stick to his routine, somehow things have changed with sleep. But in so many aspects of his life, he had a really firm routine. So we were trying to stick to that. And that's really important. You know, your adopted child needs to have the consistency, because they're the one going through all the massive life changes. But that did mean that there were some changes that Zoe had to kind of adapt to. Whereas I think if we'd had a birth child, they would have kind of fitted into our routine a bit more, as my friends' birth children did when they had a second child. So this story was to help children to sort of vent about those little minor frustrations, and understand that they're not alone, and it's all worth it because you get to have this amazing sibling. So most recently, not most recently, then I wrote Cousins by Adoption, after a very similar event to this, actually, because I was asked could I please write a cousin version of that, and lots of uncles and aunts wanted to read it to their nieces and nephews. So. And then my last one, well, not last, but most recent, I don't know when I'll stop, because my children keep asking me questions. This is Room in the Nest, and this was inspired by my son, actually, asking questions. Now that he can talk, it's non-stop, which is fantastic. And some of the children who he was in foster care with have gone back to their birth families, been reunified with their birth families, and some have been in kinship placements, and some were in long-term foster care. And so I wanted to explain all those different things to him, because he was trying to understand why it was different for all these children. So that story goes through several different scenarios and the foster carers' roles in looking after those children. Okay, so does anyone have any questions for me?
Well, just to quickly say, before everyone chips in, Holly, thank you. That was absolutely amazing. I have sat here and cried a couple of times listening to your story, for being so honest, and you know, it's not always plain sailing, as we know, sadly, and introduction can be an absolute minefield, as well as the journey, which I hate the word journey, but there's no other word to describe our journey as adopters either. The only other thing I just wanted to ask if you could talk before we open it up a little bit more, because I know that you've started doing talks in schools as well, which I know for a lot of our adopters who've got children placed with them, I think they'd love to hear about the work that you've done there supporting schools to explain what adoption is and just having that word talked about
Yeah.
normally. I hate the word normal, but you know what I mean, just for other children to understand what adoption is and it for not being scary at such a young bit. So I've just wanted to chip in, ask you to do that
Oh,
little
yeah,
bit.
thank
That'd
you.
be lovely.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, so I actually was inspired to do this because in one of the Facebook groups that I'm in, I saw quite a few posts where children were saying that either their adopted child was being bullied or the older sibling, often a birth sibling, was being asked difficult questions, not necessarily bullied, but asked awkward questions and made them feel really uncomfortable. And it's innocent questions that lots of children ask because they just don't understand adoption. So it's things like, well, where are their real parents? And, well, he's not your real brother then, is he? And just comments like that can be really hurtful to a child. And so I saw these posts about some quite upset children, and I thought I could just go into the schools and talk. Because I'm an author, they'll let me come in, Most schools will do author talks. So I've offered it. I offered it in the Facebook group, and I'll do this for anyone who wants a talk at their school. So I started off doing talks where I was reading Room in the Nest. It was when I just published that one. So I think that's the best book for me to do in most situations, because it talks about a whole range of families. There's a kinship family and foster care and adoption. It also shows a couple of different kinds of adoptive family, different family structures. So I tend to talk through that story and just do a bit of a talk about different kinds of families. And I just love doing it because children ask such wonderful questions. Not always on topic, but a lot of the time they do ask really insightful questions. And it's just really great to be able to give them the right language really young, so that they're asking the right questions, and also to kind of give them an idea of what questions are okay for them to ask people, and what questions they shouldn't necessarily, they should understand that in some cases they're not going to get a response. People aren't going to want to share too much of their story. But also to make the adopted children in the room feel proud of their story and feel like it's a cool thing, it's a good thing, because an author's come in to talk about adoption and they can be like, I'm adopted, if they want to. I never single them out, but I find that generally children will say, oh, I'm in foster care, or I'm adopted, or I'm in a kinship family, and that's really lovely. And in one school that I spoke to, a little girl was taken into foster care a few weeks after my talk, and the teacher told me that was really helpful, that they kind of all had that framework and understood it, and so nobody was really quizzing her about it, and nobody thinks it's strange, because they now accept that that's one type of family. So I do a lot of those, and I also do a lot of talks, which I love doing, for the older siblings, and it's a kind of a big brother or big sister talk, and I'll read the adopting a little brother or sister book, and it's really fun because it's to kind of get the class to understand what's going on, again, so that they're not ignorant to the situation and they don't ask the wrong questions, but also just to get them all a bit excited and get the older sibling a bit excited. I did one of them a couple of weeks ago, and it was just amazing. The children were all so excited, and they kept hugging the girl who was going to be a big sister soon and saying, oh, it's so cool, it's going to be so amazing. So it's just a really good celebratory thing to do. So if anybody ever wants me to do one of them, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can contact me by email. It's holly@hollymarlow.com. And there's lots of information on my website about how I do them, because I do them by Zoom or Teams, whatever the school uses. And I don't charge the school, so they don't really have a good excuse to say no. and I can tailor the length of it. I can also tailor it to your child. If there's certain words you think will be triggering for them to hear, I can avoid those. You know, you can get in contact with me and we can do it however you think will be helpful for the children. I really enjoy doing it, so please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Oh, thank you so much, Holly. I won't chip in anymore now, but we'll open up to questions if people wanted to. I guess the easiest way is sticking your hand up or what have you. Oh, hold on. We've got a Stu. We might need you on technical advice here on the chat bit.
Okay, so can you see the question in the chat?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
Shall I read it or do you want to?
Go ahead, read it, yeah.
Okay, so we've got one asking about the script that I used to practice to speak to Jake and what kind of words I used. So it's been a while now since I've needed the script, but what I did, so I won't be as smooth as I used to be, but I used to always start with looking at a photo of our family. So I kind of set his room up. So there's a photo of us and then the album from a social worker. So a social worker gave us an album that had some photos in lieu of a life story book. We do now have a life story book, but it was really late coming because of staffing issues at the agency. So we did manage to get some photos of the birth parents. And then we've got the photo album from the foster carers. And that ends with photos of us and the foster carers. So it's quite a good natural progression, really. But I always start by looking at the photo of all of us. And when he was really little, I'd say, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? And I'd get him to say who we were. And I'd say, yeah, I'm your mummy and that's your daddy. And that's Zoe, she's your big sister. Which was really sweet because we call her Zozo. And so for a while he was calling her Dodo Dista because he was trying to say Zozo's sister because he thought that was her whole name. So we always started off with that, and then we'd move on to then I'd get out the book with the photos of the birth family and I'd say, this is so-and-so. I'm obviously not going to share their names here, but so this is so-and-so. You grew in her tummy. And then there was a photo of both the birth parents holding Jake. And I'd say, and this is so-and-so, and they loved you so much. But unfortunately, the social workers were worried that they weren't, well, at first I would just say, but then you went to live with the foster care. As time went on, his understanding improved. I would add in, the social workers were worried he wasn't going to look after you. So you went to stay with the foster family, and then we look at the foster family photos. And he loves going through them because he loves them so much and he has really good memory of his time with them. So that takes quite a long time. And there's a lot of photos where you can see that they're taking care of him. So I would emphasize that. So I'd say, like, look, you're in the bath because they're looking after you and making sure you're clean, and they're feeding you and they're making sure you have enough food, that sort of thing. And then there were the photos of us at the end of that book. So I'd explain that as we were coming towards the end of the album, I'd start talking about how the social worker had been looking for a long time, and then flip over the page and say, and they've found us, and now we're your family, and we look after you, and we're going to be your family forever. And now I can say, and now you're a Marlow too, and you'll always be a Marlow. Although my daughter corrected me on that the other day because she pointed out that he could change his surname, so we had a discussion about that. But I said, well, you'll still always be my baby. So I'm part of our family. So there's that. And also talking of life story stuff, that reminded me, I wanted to point out that we don't do life story work just in that one activity, although obviously that's a really concentrated thing. We also just do it kind of every day. Whenever there's a moment where I have to keep him safe, if we're crossing a road or something, I'll hold his hand and I'll remind him that I keep him safe because I'm his mummy. And that's just to reinforce that that's what families should do and do. And whenever he's asking for 7 chocolate biscuits, I'll explain that, he can really only have 2 because that's a healthy choice, or he can't have any because he's already had some today or whatever. And I'll say that's because I have to keep you healthy because I'm your mum and it's my job to keep you healthy. So this is why I'm doing this. So yeah, there's lots of ways that we kind of reinforce the script that we run through, just by reminding them that we keep them safe and healthy and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Holly. Any other questions from everyone? You can use the chat if you want to, or just unmute and ask questions. I think you've just covered so many things, Holly. You've probably answered everybody's questions. They've got nothing left.
I did make myself a list of points. I probably look a bit strange in the video, looking over to the side a lot. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Definitely silence there, isn't it?
Oh, shall I talk about contact? Because usually someone asks about that. So let's pretend someone has.
Lovely, thank you.
Oh no, we've got a question.
Oh.
How do you deal positively with awkward questions at school from children and parents? So there have been a couple of awkward ones, not too many yet. The main issues is that obviously parents would be concerned that I might say something that's really triggering to their child. So one thing I never do is read Delhi Duck in class, because I think that is a book that should either be read in therapy or with your parents in a cuddle. You know, it's a sort of, it's a nurturing thing. They need to be feeling really safe when they hear that story. And I don't know the stories of all the children in that classroom, so I wouldn't read Delhi Duck there, because it does go into it doesn't spell out the details. They are metaphors, but children are so good at figuring out what these metaphors relate to in their own lives. I wouldn't want to do that. So I also make sure that all the parents know that it's happening. And so I ask that the school send out a flyer to all of the parents beforehand. And usually that's quite easy to check, because usually a parent in a social media group or something has contacted me and said, my son's in this class. So I'm able to confirm with them that has happened, because I don't want them to be surprised. I want them to have a chance to forewarn any children who might be triggered. And then in terms of awkward questions from children, mostly children ask me really random things like, can you write a book about my dad? You know, that sort of thing. So for the most part, it's quite straightforward and nothing too emotional. I have had a few more sort of on the verge of difficult questions where children wanted to understand what kind of things could lead to them being in foster care. And for those, I've said that I've got another book that they can read about that, that they can borrow from the school library, because I usually donate one, or someone else has donated one already. If it's somebody who's already got my book, they tend to have done that. So I tend to suggest that they read that from the library with their parents if they want to understand in more detail. But I haven't had that many awkward questions, actually. Just bizarre questions mostly. Children are such fun.
Oh, thank you, Holly. Any other questions or thoughts from anyone? Oh, hold on. They've got another one.
From Nicola. Okay, so it says, at what point did you tell Holly that she was going? So Zoe, I think that's meant to be Zoe. At what point did you tell Zoe that she was going to have a brother? So we were, because we'd had the one link seem so positive and then fall through, we were quite cautious. There's an apology there, that's fine. We were quite cautious, so we didn't, fortunately, we hadn't told her about the first match that then didn't come to anything. And I think that's because I had a kind of uneasy feeling about this lack of clarity on some of the medical questions from the start. So we held off until we had gone through matching panel, and we knew it was a certainty. And I'm really glad we did, because as soon as I showed her a photo of him, and as soon as I did, she was like, well, when's it happening then? So, well, actually, first she cried because she wanted a sister, which was really awkward. But she then got over that within 24 hours, thank goodness. But she didn't really want to wait, as you can understand. So I think it was really good. We'd built a lot of groundwork and we talked to her about adoption in lots of ways, but we didn't tell her that it was definitely happening with this child until it was definitely happening soon with this child. And even then we still had a bit of a wait because of the COVID delays and a bit of uncertainty there, and we had the social distancing stuff. But to prepare her, we had been reading more general books about different types of family and watching TV shows like Hey Dougie, where there's there's a crocodile child with an elephant mum. And so we talked about how the elephant had probably adopted that crocodile. And there were quite a few other programs. There's another one, Bug Diaries. The Bug Diaries, I think it is, or just Bug Diaries, where there's two worm mums. So although technically worms can reproduce asexually, I didn't mention that because it wasn't really helpful at that point. I used that as there's two mums there, and she's at the age where she knows enough about how babies are made to know that you need something from a man and something from a woman. So we kind of talked about how, well, maybe that's because they adopted their children. So there were quite a few TV shows that we were able to use for that, especially now that TV is becoming more diverse. It was great to have all these different things we could show her. This Chip and Potato has two dads who've got some children, and they're zebras, I think it's season 3, which I highly recommend. So yeah, we just normalized it, and then it wasn't really a very big leap for it to be. She knew that we were going through the process, so it just wasn't a very big leap for it to be finally happening to our family.
Oh, thank you, Holly. I've just noticed we've got another one that pinged in at the same time. Many of our wider family members we meet prior to placement, particularly grandparents, often raise worries about how adoption could impact on a birth child. And was that something that you've experienced within your family, or through, the sort of wider network of adopters and what have you? Thank you.
So much, yeah. So many people said, that they might be so damaged that it destroys Zoe's life, and that kind of thing. And that was quite hard, because in a way I feel like Zoe's amazing and she's going to really enrich a child's life. And actually, if there is a child who's really damaged, then maybe they should have Zoe in their life. And I don't think I don't think he's damaged her life in any way. I mean, there's been hard times because he's 3, he gets angry, and he has sort of tough times where he has big feelings and whatever. And there were some frustrating times when he was pushing me away, but really he's been absolutely amazing. So the way I dealt with that with our family was to basically just tell them that we were adopting, rather than make it a conversation about us considering it. Because when I first said we were considering it, it was tough. People weren't sure how it was going to go. People at work also were suggesting that we should do the kind of adoption they'd seen on TV, where the American version of adoption, where you can essentially get a newborn who everybody thinks is a clean slate. And I'm sure all of you who've done trauma-related training know that that's not the case. It can be very traumatic for children. So we had lots of kind of different opinions coming from different angles. But we really just kind of stuck with well, this is what we want to do. It's the only way we're excited about having another child. People kept saying, well, are you sure you can't, do some kind of really clever IVF and select an embryo that your body won't reject? But I just wasn't excited about that. So we just kind of kept emphasizing that we weren't excited about any other route to changing our family. And we didn't feel that we were done, and we felt that Zoe would be an amazing big sister. And so we were excited about adoption, so that was what we were going to do. And I think the more I talked about adoption, the more people could see that I was excited about it, and I'd been researching it, and so they kind of understood that. Also, I have some adopted friends, so I think it was reassuring when I said, look, these guys are adopted and they're amazing. These are 2 of the nicest people I've ever met. So I think that helped too.
Thank you. I think there's another, I'm sure I just saw one. Hold on, I'm getting in a...
I think I've slightly answered that. I expanded my answer a bit there. It was asking if there have been difficulties as we have a birth child. So yeah, there were some tough times when he rejected me, as I mentioned, and so for example, near the start, when he was really pushing me away, my daughter didn't really get any time with my husband because my son wanted to be with him all the time. But we just took that opportunity for me to do lots of things with her, and then lots of things with my son. Because my son would hang out with me if it was just me, I took him out, and so then she was with my husband. So we basically just separated the children every now and then for a portion of the day. And we still do that now to an extent. And my son and I have a routine where we go for a walk at the weekend. I feel quite affronted if the weather's too bad for us to do that, because it's really lovely bonding time. And my daughter has similar things that we do together that my son's not involved in. And I think it's just really good to get those routines going where they both know that you are going to, if there's two of you, obviously that makes it a lot easier, but where you are going to do something with each child, and that's just how it is, then they might be frustrated at first, but they kind of get used to the routine. Routines all you really need with children in a lot of cases. So it really has helped.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering, Holly, and I don't want to get into a moaning about social workers, because we're obviously all very amazing, as you know, Holly. But it was just to find out whether, obviously, you did a huge amount to prepare your daughter, but did the process and the sessions with the social worker with your daughter, did that help her, or do you think could have there been anything different that could have happened to help prepare your daughter for adoption and her little brother? I wasn't sure if anything could have been any different, and you obviously went through it during lockdown, which would have been horrendous as well.
That did complicate things, definitely. So one of the things that led me to writing the book was that the social worker is the one who explained that she looks for families for children who can't live with their birth families. And although we'd done quite a lot to explain to her what adoption meant in terms of a child coming to live with us, we hadn't done that bit yet and explained that they can't live with their birth family. So in hindsight, I regret that. But I think perhaps discussing with the parents, or pre-warning the parents that this is how you're going to explain your job would be good, if that's how you do it. Because that she basically burst into tears after the social worker left, because she'd been thinking about that one. But our social workers were all really lovely, and they made her feel at ease. And she loved it when she got her chance to be interviewed. So the lady who came actually tried to make it kind of more of almost like a play therapy type thing. So she had Play-Doh and that sort of thing. But I think Zoe would have been happy to just be interviewed, because she'd seen my husband and I be interviewed and she wanted to be like us. But she loved it. It was fine. I think it would be good if the social worker, if the agency had put on kind of an event for birth siblings, and that's something that they are looking at doing now, where because they have some sort of extended family training, which I meant to say earlier, actually in response to a different question, that we got all our family to go on this training for extended family and friends to understand just a sort of overview of trauma, that kind of thing, and that really helped them. And so I've been working with one of the social workers to try to arrange something similar, but at a child level, where they're going to do sort of activities to understand at an age appropriate level a little bit more about attachment and trauma, because it's amazing how much children can understand. You know, my daughter's seen my son rejecting me violently, and she asked, why does he not like you? So I explained, it's not that he doesn't like me, it's that he thought that his last mum was going to be his mum forever, and then she left, so now he doesn't really trust me to be his mum, and that's happened to him twice now. So, you know, it's understandable. So children can understand stuff like that. So I think it would be really helpful if there was kind of a program for older siblings to go through that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make that happen.
Great idea, and we'll be pinching that now, Holly.
Let me know if you want any involvement from me.
It's something we've been talking about as a service, as something because it's very unique as well. You know, all different adopters, everyone's comes in different shapes or sizes, and it's certainly something that we've been talking about an awful lot, about making sure that we prepare birth children as best as best as we can, you know. But thank you. Any other bits and pieces from anyone? If not, I'll just keep asking my curious questions. Now I've got to meet Holly almost in real life. I was wondering, and I know obviously your little one was placed during lockdown and when things were incredibly tight and restricted with the first sort of lockdowns. Were you offered, or was it encouraged to have like a one-off meeting with birth parents, or was that not an option because of where we were in the crazy world at the time? And if you did, how did that go?
Really sadly, we've not been able to make that happen, and we almost have a few times. But the first time it was scuppered because of COVID, and then there was some incident that made the social workers think actually perhaps they weren't in the right place emotionally to deal with meeting me. So then that got cancelled, and I'm still hoping that it will happen. Every couple of weeks, I ask the social worker if she's had a response, because the birth family keeps saying that they want to do this, they want to meet me, but we've because of where we live and where they live and places we go to, it's best if they don't meet my husband is the conclusion we've come to, which it doesn't really make a lot of sense without the detail behind it, but I can't really go into that. But I'm hoping that they'll meet me at some point. But so far we've not been able to make that happen. But we have recently had a couple of letters from them, from the birth mother, which has been fantastic. We've been sending them. I think I've sent 5 now, and the last 2 I sent a stamped addressed envelope with it. Just occurred to me at the last minute that might be a helpful thing, because their life might be a bit chaotic at the moment, and that just having a stamped address envelope might just make it that bit easier to respond to us. They don't have to go and buy some envelopes and stamps. So it's addressed to the contact team, and I included that with the last 2, and I got responses to both those letters from the birth mother. They've unfortunately, the birth father seems to have moved on from where he was staying, and the agency haven't been able to pass on his letters, so they're keeping them for him. But the birth mother finally replied, and she replied to all of the letters, because I'd been asking questions in each one. And so that was phenomenal and really emotional. Really, you can feel the love reading the letters. It's just beautiful, and it's so worth having, because we read them out to Jake, and Zoe's a little jealous that he's getting this lovely letter, but you know, that's a first world problem, and we talk her through why it's okay, and he needs this. Good for him to know a bit about them, and it's just really wonderful to be able to tell him things like what their favourite children's books were when they were children, and what their favourite colour is, stuff that really matters to children. And, you know, my son is obsessed with what everyone's favourite colour is, and his favourite colour is orange, and he tells everyone that. So it was just really nice to be able to tell him that. So yeah, I'd recommend doing that if you don't already.
And do you,
said they're pinching
you yeah, I know. Between me and my work colleagues on WhatsApp, it's just gone a bit crazy about the stamped address envelope idea. Like, why has no one thought of that?
It's so worth it, and it's not very expensive, but it's really made a difference. Yeah.
Not at all. And how involved do you get him in the writing of the letters? I didn't know if you got him to do drawings, or has he asked you questions that you then put in? How do you do that?
Yeah, he does ask me questions. When we're going through the photos, he'll ask me questions, because there's photos of things like their pets and stuff, and he'll say, is that dog noisy? You know, so I asked that in one of the letters, and I said, Jake wants to know if your dog's noisy. And it was really lovely because they answered that, so I was able to tell him. So he does quite often come up with questions, and I always encourage him to do a couple of drawings. He's actually quite a prolific artist at the moment, so we had quite a stack to squeeze into the envelope for our last contact. but that's really lovely. We also send photos, not printed out ones because of our contract agreement. The arrangement is that we send the photos to the social workers and then birth parents can go in and view them, and videos as well. So sometimes I say, oh, that's a really good picture. Shall I send that one to the names of his birth parents? And he'll say, no, not that one. I'll do this. And then he'll do another pose. And so he's quite involved in that too.
Oh, amazing. Oh, hold on. I've got another one before I just end up having a bit of a chat with you, Holly. Sorry. Do you have any must-read or must-see books or documentaries that you think every adopter should look at or read before or whilst going through the process and post-process, even when we're matched with children, because it doesn't stop, does it, as you know?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, so I try to read mostly books by initially I read books by adopters, but now I've kind of changed my tactics and I try to read books by adoptees and birth parents, because I think I kind of already know how adopters feel, but I need to put myself in their mindset so that I can be a better parent. And so I've read some really good books by birth parents that really spoke to me. I'm just trying to think what they were called. So there was Baby of Mine by Laura Anderson, and there's one, Survival Without Roots by Anna Anderson, which was fantastic. There's also one called The Birth Father by Andrew Ward, which was really difficult to find, actually. There's only a couple of books out there by birth fathers, and this one I think I found an old copy on eBay. There's not many around, but it was really good. And it was about the old kind of style of adoption where people are emotionally pressured into giving up their child. So it is different to how most children come into adoption nowadays, but the birth father's feelings and that sort of thing was still relevant. And I felt like each of those stories gave me ideas of how I could be better at contact and things that the birth family might like to hear. And then, so yeah, I'd really recommend all of those. Anna Anderson is particularly amazing because she is an adopter, adoptee, and and a birth parent. So she's literally all three of the triad. So yeah, she's incredible. And you might want to get her on this, actually, to do one of these episodes.
Don't worry.
Yeah, she's great.
What we'll do, I've got notes of those ones, and I think I remember seeing you do a little book review of some of them, so we can share that with everyone that's on the meeting today. Because I remember you saying once about the book written from the birth father, and it's such a rare thing to find words from birth fathers, unfortunately, which helped you to sort of phrase things to try and engage with birth dad, even though obviously he's in a space at the minute that's not conducive, but hopefully in time. Right, okay. Any other questions or thoughts that that people have got or would like to know? I don't know how long to pause for, Holly. But I think unless anybody else oh, there we are. There's a few pipping in. Any other TV shows like Hey Dougie?
Yes.
That are good. And we'll make a list of them and add them.
Yeah, shall I send you a list and you can?
Yeah, that would be amazing if you've got one. And again, we can share that around. Fantastic. Okay. Any other recommendations for views from male adopters?
Yeah,
because it generally is us women that talk, isn't it?
Yeah.
And watching in the and following in the Instagram world of adopters, it sadly is a lot of women talking and sharing. Did you know any male adopters that are worth?
I do know of a male adopter who wrote a biography recently. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. His name is Joseph something, but I'll find that and send that to you as well. I haven't read it yet myself. I'm about 10% of the way through.
Oh,
But
fabulous.
it's super good so far.
There we are. You're going to be like our go-to, Holly. We'll just be pinging you emails for the next few weeks now. But just to say a massive, massive, massive thank you for coming and joining us. It's amazing that your kids haven't trampled in and come in and joined and wanted to know, Mammy, what are you up to? And I'm just really pleased that my evening sat scrolling, following all my famous adopters, as I call you all, and randomly messaging after a couple of wines, that that you agreed to come and talk, because it's been absolutely fantastic. And you know, you've really shared an awful lot, and very emotional story as well of the ups and the downs. And we're incredibly grateful as well for the books that you've written, because I know it's certainly helped my daughter, and I know many others. So thank you so much. So if there's
You're
no
welcome.
other questions and bits and pieces, we'll be signing off, and to let everyone know to watch this space for future ones, as we're really pleased it was more than just me turning up, which was the initial worry. It's a great idea would just be me rocking up with you, Holly, which I would have loved, because I've loved talking to you. But thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for coming along as well. It's been really insightful and really lovely, and thank you for sharing your family story and your little one. And send a big thank you to your two kids, because without them we wouldn't have had the stories and everything else. They're famous in their own rights as well, which I'm sure they semi-know from the photos and Instagram as well.
I'm just glad to be able to help.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much, Holly, and we'll be in touch very soon. All right.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.